Welcome to another edition of Millennials Are Killing Capitalism Live. Please take a minute, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Share this with folks, share it now, share it with folks later. I know some folks will be watching this with us live and some folks will catch the replay, but it is important to get this conversation in front of folks as urgently as possible because we do have, as we will talk about, a very short time crunch here around Khalifa. So we'll get into that in a minute. I'm going to invite our guest. Our guest, ML Smith, is the co-director of Missourians to Abolish the Death Penalty. Michelle is a criminal punishment system impacted advocate, abolitionist, and activist who experienced incarceration during the COVID-19 pandemic, which made her more intimately aware of the dire reality faced by our imprisoned populations, as well as the egregious actions and apathetic behavior by the vast majority of institution staff and administrators. Her existence within the intersections of being black, a woman, disabled, systems impacted, and experiencing generational poverty are the foundations of her ideological framework, which is rooted in advocating for those suffering and struggling within a society created, built, and carried out to oppress, marginalize, and dehumanize targeted vulnerable populations. She is dedicated to using her experiences, knowledge, determination, and voice in the struggle for equity, justice, and recognition. And we are here today to talk about Marcellus Williams, who has taken the Islamic name Khalifa Ibn Rayford Daniels. And so I will let ML say more, and just welcome to the show, ML. It's good to be with you today. Thank you for taking time. I know that you're really busy doing this very urgent work. I know you're always doing urgent work, but that this is, we're in really crunch time. So thank you for taking some time to talk to us and our audience today.
Thank you so much, Jared, for inviting me and the whole channel, Millennials Killing Capitalism. Thank you all for inviting me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Josh, my co-host, was the person who connected me and said this would be a good conversation to have. So shout out to Josh also for setting this up. So let's give folks a little bit of background. I know we want to make sure that people understand the urgency and the actions that they can take, and we can get to that in just a minute. But for folks who don't know a whole lot about Khalifa and this case, help us understand a little bit about who he is, as well as I know that he's somebody who's been taken up by the Innocence Project. He's wrongfully convicted. There's a lot of, and so talk a little bit about those dynamics as well, if you would.
Of course. So thank you for that initial question. So Khalifa is a person, in the aspect of the case we're dealing with, is a person who is innocent, is a person who, in the crime, in the serious, egregious crime that happened in 1998, where Mrs. Gale was killed, he is a person that was convicted of this murder based upon things that we know not to be very reliable, including informant testimony. He is a person who has been fighting for his life for the last 24 years and more at this point. And he is a person personally, himself. He, like you said, is a devout Muslim. Khalifa is also the Imam of the prison where he is held. So a lot of the other men in that prison look for him for spiritual advisement, being a mentor, being an advisor overall, and he takes that role very seriously. He's also a dad, he's a grandfather, he's a son and an uncle, and someone that many, many people support, love, respect, and who would be devastated if he was not here with us.
I appreciate that. And could you share just a little bit too about the work that has been done? I know that the decision has been made at this point to go forward with its execution, but I know there was a lot of work to try to stop it leading up to this as well, that had to do with like DNA evidence and other things like that. Could you just say a little bit about that background too?
Sure. Well, there definitely has been a lot of work that's gone into this case, and just to be clear, even the decision that came down last week of a local circuit court judge, there is still a lot of work to do. There is still litigation that has been filed this week from his legal teams as well as the prosecutor. So they are not giving up, and we are not giving up on this matter. So a little bit of background on, kind of what happened and what's leading up to this. I know you mentioned the DNA. So in 1998, there was a murder of a woman who was, interestingly enough, a former a reporter at a local paper. And Mrs. Gale was in her home, and someone broke in and brutally killed her with one of the knives in her own kitchen. And so again, this was a horrible situation. So the case actually went cold for over a year. The police had no suspects. No one had come forward. And because it was such a brutal situation, there was a lot of evidence at the scene. Of course, there was the murder weapon that was bloodied, etc. There were footprints in blood as well. There were fingerprints, and there was because it was a fight. Of course, the victim was clutching hairs in her hand. So there was a lot of evidence at the scene. And so even with all that, the police had no leads, right? So over a year later, Mrs. Gale's husband, who is a doctor, a medical doctor, he decided to put up his own money as a $10,000 reward for information, to lead to the arrest and conviction of who killed his wife. Now, this gesture definitely is understandable, right? Because you want to know who harmed your loved one. You want to get answers. And if you have the resources, you want to put it to that effect. But as people that do work in advocacy in the legal field, we know that when a monetary reward is available, when there is some type of incentive for someone to come in live or make up a story, etc., people are going to do that because humans are humans, right? And so after this reward was put up, there were two people that came forward and basically said Khaliifah told them he killed this woman, is what it amounted to. And one of the people, interestingly enough, was what we call a jailhouse snitch, or jailhouse informant. He had been locked up with Khaliifah because Khaliifah was not a perfect person. I don't want to, pretend that he was. He was not a perfect person. However, just because he was not a perfect person does not mean that he killed this victim. And so this jailhouse informant, decided to say that Khaliifah told him he killed this victim, and he said he wanted his money before he testified. So there has been information that came out recently where the husband of the victim met the informant in the prosecutor's office back in 2021, and gave him $5,000 in cash. And within weeks, this informant took the stand at a trial and said that Khaliifah told him he did this. So even how he was convicted was very shady, right? But since that conviction and that death sentence being handed down, his attorneys have been fighting for over 20 years. This is the third scheduled execution date. The last two were stopped by the courts and then our former governor. And it's still a fight. It's still a fight. So all of that physical evidence, forensic evidence has been tested. None of it matches Khaliifah, including the DNA, including the footprints, the fingerprints, the hairs that she was clutching. Right now, if you've seen pictures, Khaliifah is bald, but 20 some years ago, he actually had hair. So even that evidence did not match him. So none of the physical evidence at the crime scene matched him at all. But our system, right, doesn't need actual proof. They just need the semblance of a proof, just to convince the jury and to trot out, all of these horrible pictures and all of these horrible images, and to get a conviction. So that is what happened. And now it is still a fight. Now that they know who the DNA belonged to on the knife, and this is the crazy part of it. It belongs to the prosecutor in the case. Now, there may have been DNA of the killer on the knife. It's possible there was, right? But the prosecutor, shortly before trial, he says that he handled the knife without gloves. He actually said he done it a lot, which is interesting to me. but he handled the weapon without gloves. He put the evidence sticker on the weapon. He held it. He gave it to people. He handled this without gloves. So he basically contaminated and mishandled the knife. So instead of possibly the killer's DNA being on it, his DNA is on it, right? But Khalifa's was never found on it. Even when they first tested the weapon, or nor now, his DNA was never found on it. So that is the crux of his innocence claims, and also with his attorneys fighting today, a lot of constitutional violations happen, right? Including the mishandling of the evidence, but also not choosing Black people on the jury for reasons that are always racially biased. A lot of that happened in that case as well. The jurors weren't chosen. One of them had unkempt hair, and from the description that he gave, the man had dreadlocks. And so because of these issues, all of the violations, they are still fighting, including our local prosecuting attorney is fighting to free Khalifa, because looking back on his office's, handling of this case 20 years ago, he sees that his office messed up at that time, and he's trying to make it right. So that's kind of the overall view of what's happening up to this point. And like I said, several cases are in court. Our local Supreme Court, our state Supreme Court, the federal district, and the U.S. Supreme Court. So there are currently motions in all three of those courts, and the attorneys are doing their level best to save Mr. Williams' life.
Yeah, thank you for all of that background. And certainly, whenever you have a prosecutor from an office working to exonerate somebody that their own office, put inside years ago, that is always a very strong indicator of their innocence, because they don't like to do that. They don't like to, reopen and say, our office messed up, and it doesn't look good for their office. So yeah, I know. So that's, yeah. So let's talk about actions that people can take. I'm going to pull up this slide here, and I'm going to drop a link in the chat too, where folks can also download it from, my tweet there if they need to. But and then of course they can go to freekhalifa.org. Just everybody note there's two I's. That's a little bit of a distinction that can mess you up. But yeah, so talk a little bit about the actions that you think are the people should be making right now, the kind of strategic actions that people can make in this moment.
Well, thank you. There definitely are actions that we're asking the public to take. And the main thing is letting the officials in the state of Missouri know that you do not want this execution to take place, especially those people in Missouri. We are asking everybody to call. But I believe that people who reside in Missouri, who are tax-paying citizens of this state, definitely need to make it known to our elected officials that this is not something that they support. Taxpayer money goes into this, right? It's not free to kill people. Actually, the whole process of a death penalty case can cost up to $1 to $2 million. So this is something that our community is paying for, and we need to let our elected officials know that this is not something that we support. So we are asking people to call our governor, whose name is Governor Mike Parson. His direct number is there, but also the Innocence Project created this link, and I made a bit.ly out of it. It's Gov Stop This Execution. And in that link, if people click it, you can email the governor, call the governor, and tweet the governor from one page. So that was an amazing tool that they created. So we are asking people to use that as well. And then lastly, sign the petition. Next Tuesday afternoon, I will be in our state capitol, and I will be delivering these petition signatures. And thousands of people have signed it, and we're asking thousands more to sign it. And we will have a time to go to our capitol, to the governor's office, to let him know in person that we do not agree with the fact that he is trying to execute an innocent person. And we're asking him to stop it, stay the execution, and allow for either a new trial to happen or more information to come forward that can provide the proof that the courts are needing. So those are all the calls to action right now. And like I said, I'll be at our state capitol next week, actually Monday and Tuesday, because Monday is the state Supreme Court hearing. And then Tuesday, we're going to drop the petition and do a rally. So if there are people in Missouri who would like to come to our state capitol, definitely can connect with us. And, we're going to try to get as many people to show up as possible. But people that cannot come, please take the actions. It only takes a couple of minutes to call the office. Now, I've heard from several people when they call the governor's office, they either get hung up on, or the voicemail is full, nobody answers the phone, etc. But I encourage you to keep calling and also send an email, right? Or tweet the governor as well. Governor Parson is also, they have a page from on Twitter and also Instagram. So definitely tag the page as well. We need to let these people know this is not okay, and they're not going to just kill an innocent Black man in the dark. So we definitely want to amplify the case. And then lastly, Jared, people can do what they've been doing, making content. People have been sharing graphics. People have been making videos on like TikTok and Instagram. So all of those things help amplify the case. So that's what we're asking people to do over these next 4 days. In addition to the legal team doing what they do in court, we need to keep amplifying Khaliifah in our public eye.
Absolutely. And someone noted that the Innocence Project link pushed through their call to a representative this morning when the direct call ran into a full mailbox. And I think that's having done phone zaps over the years for prisoners inside, a lot of times the mailboxes do fill up to the first people that you try to contact. So I think it's good to find other people that you can contact and leave voicemails for or talk to. And so, absolutely. And definitely encourage anybody who's in Missouri to join you at the state capitol. As well as these simple actions that people can take. So thank you for that. Also, I'll just say to the audience, like if you have questions for ML, we have a little bit of time. And if there's anything that you want to ask, get more information on while she's here, please feel free to ask in the comments and I'll pull those up. Before we move on to some more general topics about your work, are there any things else that you want to share about Khaliifah as a person or about this case?
I actually was thinking about something else. It's always on my mind, family, right? Family members of people who are incarcerated and as well as on death row. They're a big part of my work. And so I, have been in contact with Khaliifah's family, including his son, who is very close with his dad, is very supportive. And he, as a Black man himself, is definitely struggling with what's happening, but he understands that he has to push forward and be strong for his father. So also asking people to keep his family uplifted in prayers, and just thoughts, and understand that this thing does not happen in a bubble. It has a rippling effect. So it affects so many people in his life and in everybody's life that's touched by these deaths, including the legal teams, the families, supporters. Everybody is touched by the horrors that's happening right now. So definitely want to keep those folks amplified as well in what is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is such a incarceration, and we can talk about this as we get more into your work and everything else. I mean, it has such a profound impact on families, on communities. It's really devastating. So your organization specifically, is seeking to abolish the death penalty in Missouri. Can you share a little bit with folks about that work as well? Some states do have the death penalty, some don't, some have it, and then don't usually. Like I'm in Pennsylvania and they have it, but pretty much everybody's now sort of switched over to life without parole, and so they don't really. So, which is also really awful. But talk about the work you to do around seeking to abolish the death penalty in Missouri.
Sure. So our organization has been around since 2005, and it is currently a space where we are seeking specifically to abolish the death penalty. Because I know sometimes, we talk about alternatives to the death penalty, which the alternative in our country is life imprisonment without parole, which is still a death sentence, right? It may be slower, but it's still a sentence where you are incarcerated, you're caged for the rest of your life. But in this moment, we are trying to abolish the death penalty. And in our state and many other states in the South, it's something that is not easy to do, right? When we talk about capital punishment or death penalty, it is a reimagining of lynching, right? Lynching from trees. So they went from lynching folks to doing it, quote unquote, the legal way. And so when we understand that that is the reimagining of the system to just lynch poor and Black people, we see why Southern states are so reluctant to let go of this historically egregious practice. And so our work involves incremental steps right now, and we call it abolition by attrition. And when I say attrition, I mean, the things that contribute to capital punishment system is what we're tackling. For instance, we're trying to pass laws around putting mentally ill and intellectually disabled people on death row. There is a Supreme Court precedent, a U.S. Supreme Court precedent that says we're not supposed to execute mentally ill or intellectually disabled people, right? But it still happens. And it happened actually last August in Missouri. A person with severe schizophrenia was executed. So that's one thing we're trying to tackle. We're also trying to tackle something we call a judicial loophole. And this only exists in a few states, but it's a space where even when the jury is non-unanimous on the verdict, right? So for instance, if 3 jurors wanted the person to get a death sentence and 9 jurors said no, give them life. If they're not unanimous in that particular verdict of life or death, a judge can come in and give the person, the defendant, whatever punishment he wants. And it has happened where judges have given people a death sentence, even though a jury did not give that person a death sentence. So we don't think that that loophole that exists to allow a judge to have that type of power, we just don't think it should exist. So that's what we're trying to stop as well. But we are working towards full abolition. We do want to abolish the statute in Missouri that calls for the death penalty. The last time it was done was in 2021 in Virginia. And interestingly enough, Virginia had over 100 people on their death row. And by the time they abolished it in 2021, there were only like 2 people left on death row in Virginia. So they basically killed everybody and then were like, okay, well, fine, let's go ahead and abolish it. So that's just a harsh reality of what we're dealing with. So our work involves educating our communities, talking to our elected officials across the aisle. We actually have Republicans who are supportive of our work, mainly because of the cost. Again, like I said earlier, it costs a lot to put on a capital punishment trial. It costs more to give someone a death sentence than it does for a person to live in prison for the rest of their lives. It actually costs, interestingly enough, it costs more money. So we have across the aisle support. So we put forth different bills. And at some point, our goal is to put forth a full repeal bill and get enough support in our legislature across the aisle to actually pass it. And that is the goal that, my organization is seeking. In addition, we work with families, we work with communities. It's a lot of education. People have a view of death penalty that they got to get from the media, that it solves crime, that it makes people stop doing bad things, that it helps the victim's family. It does none of those things. The death penalty is cruel for everybody, and it is expensive, and it's something that is not needed, and it has never stopped the next crime from happening. Never. That just doesn't exist. So, just debunking a lot of those myths is a lot of our community education as well. So, like I said, we're working towards that. And even beyond these campaigns, that everyday work is that education and that advocacy work, whether it be in our cities or in our state legislature.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
So talk a little bit about your own journey. I mean, in your bio, I read out some things that obviously, have to do with your own life and your journey, but talk a little bit about what brings you to this work.
So I definitely have an interesting journey to the space that I am in now. A little bit similar to a lot of people in this work, be it that I am formerly incarcerated myself. I tell people I've been in the state system, the federal system, and then many jails across Missouri and Illinois over my life. So I grew up as a poor kid in the city of St. Louis in the housing projects, and there was not a lot of opportunity. We saw death, we saw a lot of horrible things every single day. And so having that background, when I got older, some things happened in my life. And interestingly enough, I was also innocent in my cases, but when you're poor, you don't have good representation, right? When, it's like, oh, take this plea and you'll get probation. You just do it just because it's there. But I was incarcerated myself. And so when I got out of federal incarceration in 2020, um, someone told me about an organization that was hiring, and I found out about the org. I knew what the death penalty was. I knew we did it in Missouri because a lot of people don't know that this death penalty exists. I knew it existed. I actually knew of a very infamous case in my city of some folks, some Black men that got the death penalty. So I thought it was an interesting, prospect. I applied for the job. I eventually got the job, but in that moment, I could never imagine, getting this job, right, to where I would be today. So it's definitely a very different place. But I did get the job. And the one thing I did that I felt necessary, I had to sit down and learn, right? People assume because you're formerly incarcerated or because have or from a marginalized background that you know all the aspects of the system and why it works and how. That's not true. So I actually did a lot of studying, actually starting when I was incarcerated. I did a lot of studying. I'm looking at your background, and The War Before is one of my favorite books. Sophia Bukhari is a personal hero of mine. So I did a lot of studying in radical revolutionary history and politics, but also the systemic issues that we deal with. And I studied a background on capital punishment, the death penalty in our state. There is a space where, if you look at Missouri and where people documented were lynched, and overlay a map of where death penalty sentences are sought, they overlap each other, basically the same places. So I did a lot of that studying, and so I'm still learning every single day. I am someone who, when I was incarcerated, I was a law clerk, so I was kind of considered a quote unquote jailhouse lawyer. So I've been pretty familiar with the legal aspect of things and just taking that into the work that I do. So with the death penalty work, as well as anything prison. I have another org called Missouri Justice Coalition, and I focus on anything concerning the Missouri Department of Corrections incarceration, supporting people, trying to hold the system accountable for the things they're doing, getting information in and outside of the prisons to people. So anything having to do with the prison system in Missouri and actually other states and nationwide. So I do a lot of work on the federal level as well with BOP. So I tell people all the time, everything I do is around prisons. And sometimes I might annoy people, right? Because I tell this story all the time. A few years ago, I went to a gay pride parade in my city, which I had been before, but this particular year, since I've been working this work, and I went and I was talking to people, and I said, "Y'all know gay folk in prison." People looking at me like I done lost my whole mind, but this is the reality of the situation, right? Anything that happens out here happens in prison. There are gay people in prison. Missouri actually executed the first openly trans woman in this country. Her name was Amber. She was executed January 2023. There are disabled people in prison. There are people with, other issues. There are families in prison. There's grandmothers and grandchildren and mothers and daughters and sons and fathers in prison. So whatever that we deal with out here, it is definitely a reality behind those bars. And we need to connect those dots more and, pay more attention to our system of incarceration. So that's kind of what I do. I try to bring these issues of incarceration into most spaces that I enter, even with voting, right? I know we got a big election coming up. I want to talk about voting. I want to talk about the fact that formerly incarcerated people are disenfranchised from their voting rights. As of last August, I just got my voting rights back this past year. I haven't voted in over 10 years. So even those types of things about voting, there's not an issue you can mention in society and I can't relate it back to the system of incarceration. So that's kind of, overall the work that I do.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for all your organizing and education around these issues.
Thank you.
Before we let you go, let's just remind folks, I'm going to pull the slide back up,
Okay.
remind folks of what they can do, and then anything else that you want to say too as we kind of close out, unless anybody has any questions. I haven't seen any in the chat, but if folks do, feel free to speak up now.
Well, I will also give everyone our social media. I know that the freekhalifa.org is there, but our social media where we are pushing all of this info is at MADPMO. So people call it MADPMO, right? That's easy to remember. So MADPMO is our social media. So please go follow us. Share what you see, all the postings that we have, and amplify it as much as you possibly can. But again, these are our calls to actions: signing the petition, calling, tweeting, emailing Governor Parson. Also, if you can support us Tuesday during the date of the execution, we hope it will be stopped, right? And it may come down to the last few minutes, the last hour or so, when the courts or the governor calls it off. We don't know, but we're going to stand in solidarity with Khalifa and with his family on Tuesday, September 24th. So if anybody can join us, definitely let me know. And you can DM, people can DM us on social media or on the freekhalifa.org website. You can also send us a message. So stay in contact, keep doing what you're doing, and I really appreciate everyone's support in this critical hour. It is horrible that this state is considering killing an innocent person, but we've been here before, and we're not going to let it happen in the dark. So thank you again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have to take all these steps because they will do it too, and we shouldn't just rely on the system to just think that it will necessarily work in Khalifa's favor, even though he is innocent. It has to be the pressure there as well, and hopefully
Yes.
we can all come together and stop this execution. So, again, thank you so much for your work and for taking the time to share it all with us today. And I know that you're going to be around doing more things, and there's other stuff people can check out. I know there was a telethon that was recently done. I know you've had conversations on Black Liberation Media with Black Myth Podcast, recently did one with you. And so there's a lot of other material out there too for folks that want to learn more.
Yeah. YouTube has all the things. So search Free Khalifa, Marcellus Williams, all of that should pop up. So thank you so
All
much,
right.
Jared.
All right. Thank you.
Mhm.